Hello, Lord Uncle Heaton here again, reminding you to go to patreon.com/the Eastern Border and support this fine program and support our man Christoph. Let me tell you why. Of everyone I know, Christoph truly needs a get the fuck out of Dodge fund. I have a money belt. Please don't mug me, but I have a money belt when I travel that has a little zipper in it, and I keep $200 in there just in case shit goes down. You never know, right? But like in my life, what's going to happen? My kickball team loses. I go to the wrong hotel by mistake. In that guy's case, his car blows up. Some country I've never even heard of before decides they're going to try to, like, I don't know, send him into exile in Elba or something. This is a man that ought to have $5,000 cold, hard cash in some kind of weird goddamn European currency that he can use to get a fucking helicopter and get the hell out of Dodge. Now, I'm going to do my part to support our man Christoph, and I'm calling on you to do it too. Go to patreon.com/the Eastern Border. That's patreon.com/the Eastern Border to help Christoph have a cushion of cash he literally needs because of the danger he puts his life in regularly to produce this program for you. Patreon.com/the Eastern Border. Thanks.
Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. Now, I'm working on my article right now for Foreign Policy magazine and probably doing some reading for another news episode. A friend of the show and listener just asked us about a very important thing that we hadn't actually done on the show so far, and we decided to do it because, for one, I really feel ashamed that I haven't somehow covered this in all these years of making the Eastern Border. So, I will allow our friend Richard introduce himself, but we shall be talking about the one and only Automat Kalashnikov, the AK, and what's it's like, how it's made, the cultural impact, and all sorts of things. And Richard has a way better practical knowledge of the whole weapons system than I do. So, hello, Richard.
Hey, Kristaps. Thanks for having me on.
Could you please introduce yourself? Because I don't know how you guys have to say all these things with all your ranks and whatnot.
Yeah, no worries. So my name's Richard Russell. I'm a Canadian. I live in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I'm a reservist. A couple disclaimers before we get going. Anything I say here is in my personal capacity and doesn't reflect the views of the Canadian forces. I don't want to get in trouble. And then just like a brief land acknowledgement, Dartmouth is unceded Mi'kmaq land. So the Mi'kmaq actually fought a series of protracted battles when we first settled here. And the only reason that we have a town here is because we pretty much forcefully took the land, and even the bits of it that they managed to retain after the Halifax explosion, which we can talk about briefly, they stole all the rest of the land and pushed them out onto reserves, which is pretty much the story of Aboriginal people across the country. So yeah, just a brief acknowledgement of that reality, probably a good grounding to have as a Canadian.
You know, being a Latvian, I can relate to that.
Yeah, man, you know about forced resettlement.
I can relate to that, and I can also relate to the whole, the whole native thing. After all, we're still basically our pagan tribes just reconfigured, and now not pagan anymore, but our administrative divisions are all tribal stuff.
That's it. Yeah, my family's been here since like the 1830s, so like native peoples are fam, and I think we have a generational opportunity now to like renew our relationship and actually like take the treaties seriously and have a nation-to-nation relationship.
That sounds actually a really decent thing. But first of all, Richard, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to say thank you for actually asking me about have I made an episode about an AK.
Oh, yeah, man.
And I really don't know why I haven't. That just seemed so silly. I have made episodes on tanks and airplanes and all sorts of things. I have never touched a humble Kalashnikov, and that's probably because I know some things about guns, but I'm not very well versed in the whole technical specifications.
Yeah. Well, I'm an amateur gunsmith. Like I volunteer at a place that does like armory work for film and television. I'm pretty up on my rifles. So any questions you have about the technical side, I can probably field.
I think that we should start with that because, for one, that is an AK. I know that it's technically not an AK-47. The original one is just called AK, or Automat Kalashnikov, which people in the Russian gun forums tend to poke around everyone if you write 47 at the end of it. And I know that they use 7.62 times 0.39 millimeter caliber.
Yep.
And that they basically will work at extreme conditions.
That's the Cole's notes. That's what it says on the can.
As far as I know, they are not considered very accurate for long distances or something, but they're like sadly I've read over the internet, and this is often quoted, Kalashnikovs are so easy that kids can use them, and they do.
And they do, yeah. We'll talk about that when we get into non-state users of the AK.
But then, could you please give us a short, specifications of what exactly Kalashnikov entails from a gunsmith perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So it operates on a direct blowback mechanism, which means that the exhaust from the first round fired, like you have to manually chamber the first round. And after that, it loads on its own. It's a self-loading rifle or SLR. If you want to look at the technical development, you should probably go back and start with like Fedorov and because in World War I, he kitted out a rifle to basically fire full auto. It's pretty neat. There's one in the Royal Armories Museum and probably a couple others in Moscow and other places. But they kind of lost the technology in the interwar period. Like nobody really acted on it and developed it. It wasn't until around the Spanish Civil War when both the Germans and the Russians were sending forces to support their ideological counterparts in Spain that they started to see the importance of automatic weapons as a force magnifier in their rifle sections, especially when you get into urban areas, house-to-house fighting, that kind of thing. Often the guy with one more round in his rifle wins, and if you have 20 more rounds in your rifle, you win that many more times.
About the development, I just know that the whole legend goes that, Mr. Kalashnikov was kind of unhappy because of the lack of assault rifles in general and the Soviet armed forces, and he just approached this from a soldier's perspective because he wanted to build something that soldiers would actually use. Then we come to the very strenuous part of how much exactly did he borrow design-wise from the Sturmgewehr 1944, because that's a STG 1944. That's a German rifle, which is also similar to this stuff. But basically, there was a contest in the Soviet Union about assault rifle designs. He entered. He didn't win at that time, but he got assigned his constructor's bureau, from which he then built his famous AK, and then later, of course, AKMs and AK-74s and all that stuff.
Right.
The problem is here that, again, because of the whole conspiracy theories, Russian internet loves their conspiracy theories, and there are people arguing, even people who are very much like pro-Putin will oftentimes argue about how much exactly did Kalashnikov invent himself, and whether or not it was even him, just that he's the epitome of coming from a proletariat family, being poor and everything, and just he fits the image of everything.
Yeah.
But apparently he was 18 at the time. How realistic do you think is for an 18-year-old to make this?
Well, I mean, to quote Bertolt Brecht, nobody ever did anything on their own, right? So you got to think of his position within the military engineering that existed in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union were exceptionally good at taking other people's equipment and retrofitting it for their own needs. If you look at the T-26, which was like the best interwar tank, arguably. I mean, the French Renaults were pretty good. But that was on a Curtiss suspension that they basically stole through their contacts in the United States that were doing legitimate business on behalf of the state. And they were able to use that to build a whole line of light tanks that were the best in the world. And I think that they did the same thing with small arms. So when they captured German STG-40s that took an intermediate round and fired fully automatically, I don't think it would have been too complex for the Soviet engineering staff to reverse engineer that and pass along the technical drawings to Kalashnikov and anyone else who had an interest, right?
Well, I'm pretty sure because Kalashnikov has also been wounded in battle, and he was in the 24th Tank Regiment, 108th Tank Division originally. He had been wounded in battle. He wasn't coming from out of nowhere.
That's why he had the time to work on the design aspects.
That's kind of, out of all this stuff, basically, he designed this in 1944. He designed a gas-operated carbine for this everything.
Yeah,
and then just at the end of 1947, all this process of him, the contest, and him getting the constructor bureau, that ends up with our Kalashnikov, which is which is on many countries' flags and just wildly known everywhere. And sadly, if you look this up on mostly English-speaking media on YouTube, you'll find out that a lot of people call it the terrorist's favorite gun, and it's been associated with all sorts of one man's freedom fighters, other man's terrorists these days.
Oh yeah, Osama wouldn't film a video without his. He's got a nice Chinese underfolder like
I wanted
mine.
to ask you about that whole situation. I wanted to ask you about the whole caliber thing. I know that NATO does the 5.56 and
Yep.
KK does 7.62. What is the actual difference between these cartridges? Like, why this cartridge? Because I don't know anything, and I presume I have a bunch of European listeners who are just as
Sure.
betwixt as I am.
Yeah. So in World War II, they were using like full bore rifle cartridges. The Americans were using 30-06, the British 303, Soviets 7.62 by 54. Those were very high lethality and good to about a kilometer to engage people, more if you had an optic on it. So it meant that your rifle squads were really good at engaging targets out to about a kilometer. But what they found is that often they weren't, unless they were engaged in protracted trench warfare or fighting defensively, they weren't fighting at those distances. Most commonly, they were fighting out to about 300 yards. So they had an overpowered rifle cartridge, like, which is nice if, they're taking cover behind light-skinned vehicles and stuff, because you'll shoot right through them. And it's still good to have like a unit marksman and a GPMG that shoots a heavier cartridge, which NATO does. But for your average rifleman, having an intermediate rifle cartridge is more of an advantage because it has more controllable recoil. So you're able to fire more effectively at the distances that you're most likely to be engaging targets. So World War II bullets were what we call slow and dumb. They had lower muzzle velocities and they had a larger cartridge, which means that they hit big. But with intermediate rounds, they're fast and smart. So they fly quickly and they hit with less impact, which means that you have higher numbers of wounded and lower numbers of killed, which puts a strategic imperative on the enemy to get all of these casualties out, right? So it's better to wound an enemy soldier than to kill him, because then he has to get medevaced and they have to devote all those extra resources. And if you've got artillery, you can, shell them again while they're trying to do that if you really want to play dirty.
Well, or just do these, delayed explosion things that they're doing these days. Okay, but
yeah, as the Soviets say, parking lots don't shoot back.
But yeah, because while preparing for all this situation, I found out the whole thing, bunch of stereotypes about this whole situation. Like a lot of people, and I actually went and shot one with my oldest brother.
Yeah, I remember.
But yeah, saying. that was interesting. Like a recoil was weird, but he hadn't shot a real gun for a while.
Yeah,
and not supposed to do that in my job when I'm in Ukraine. However, I've heard that standard Kalashnikov, like a lot of stories about how people just dig it out of the mud and just unjam it, and then it just works.
Yeah,
and that apparently is very useful for a whole, Soviet conscript army, approximately, because it's super easy to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
It's apparently lighter than.
That's the whole ethos behind the firearm. Really, is like, can I train a farmer on it in a day? Which, with an AK, you absolutely can. Like, I could train someone on in an hour to shoot an AK.
I was trained to shoot it in about an hour and a half, so that's okay. The problem with it is apparently I don't know, I shot it, and a lot of people on the gun YouTube tend to say that it's incredibly inaccurate. Maybe I just don't know, because apparently it is less accurate in the super trained professional soldiers' hands than would be and would be like if they had some other better weapon.
Right, yeah, you're not going to be getting probably 1 inch minute of angle shots unless you put a Dragunov stock on it, which you can do. They're really nice in that way. Like, all the hardware is interchangeable.
Weirdly enough, like all this stuff, I think it made the big impact around the world. I think it was, first of all, it was Vietnam War, definitely, because I've heard legends about Western American soldiers actively not wanting to shoot their own rifles, picking up Kalashnikovs in that whole environment. And then Soviets just decided that it's super easy to just give out licenses and these guns to everyone, and they're like literally everyone all the time. There is approximately 100 million of these guns produced, and most of them are not made in the Kalashnikov concern in Russia. Most of them are just made everywhere, and there's an insane amount of them around throughout everywhere in the post-Soviet sphere. If you go to Latvian countryside and dig into some sort of abandoned barn, you'll probably find a super rusty one as well. They are not expensive, at least
Yeah.
for everything, but like,
Yeah, I know it's the same in Northern Ireland. Like like the militants mostly decommissioned their arms, but if people had a few extra rifles sitting around and they threw them in garbage bags and buried them in a bog, they're still good. If they know where they are, they geotag them, they can go get them whenever they want.
then the question is, this gun got popular again because of its widespread adoption and how easy it is to use. But what then would it be like disadvantages when you compare it to, I don't know, M14 and further on, those series of rifles? What's the difference? What makes that rifle better for people who are more specialized and trained?
So if you've got the time and you're looking at, so in the Canadian Forces, your BMQ lasts for about a month, a little over. And if you've got that kind of time to build up people with fundamentals of marksmanship, and you give them an AR-15 variant with a decent ACOG optic on it, you can train them to be very effective marksmen in the time that you have, which is a higher degree of training than Soviet doctrine really requires. So NATO forces tend to put a very high influence on the individual soldier. That comes from doctrine both in like the Central Powers and the Allied powers. Montgomery in World War II famously said, "We pay the cost of victory in oil and steel, not in lives." And that's been very much the NATO approach since the Second World War, is we go in heavy, we take as little casualties as we can, and we put fire to bear fairly accurately. We try and hit what we're shooting at rather than everything in the general area, and we try and conclude our firefights pretty quickly and get the enemy on the run so that we can mop them up. Whereas Soviet doctrine includes like more mass bombardment in their preparation for an attack, and then like waves, first going in with your like mechanized forces and then following up with your dismounted infantry, which tends to lead to like higher casualties as you're going through the urban areas. It's really, really easy to hit with IEDs because you just throw them in all the ruins and then you can remotely detonate them when you see them going by. Like it's dumb as a modern soldier to be asked to do.
Yeah, it's kind of also it's noticeable in these whole the doctrinal changes, even in how a Russian army operates with their reinforcement issues. They normally will have mass movements, and then they will just but everything comes on like it's very top down centric. There is very little active initiative for individual soldiers out there in the field. They get sent to places, and everything is like super centralized because you're supposed to just charge in with a bunch of conscripts and then see where they can manage a breakthrough, and then send in your actually professional soldiers inside that whole area.
Right. Which works too. It's just a different approach.
The big issue here is that due to corruption, a lot of people who are now conscripted to fight in Ukraine, they're not exactly given any time at the shooting range at all. Again, this is tons of anecdotal evidence, but I can't really explain all the stuff that's going on because, again, lack of documentation is a horrible thing. However, we know for sure that if you are a soldier in Russian armed forces, well, if you, for example, crash your fighter plane, if you're on one during training, they can sue you for damages, and they will.
Right.
Well, that's so obviously that causes a bunch of issues because that's how they lack the whole hourly flight rates and all this stuff. So bit of an issue there because again it's because of all the corruption and everything.
Yeah, I think if I were a Russian conscript, I would spend very little of my time thinking about how to fight the Ukrainians and a lot of it thinking about warm places to sleep, where I can get food, and where I can loot as much as I possibly can so when I go back to Russia, I'm not destitute. That would be about it.
Oftentimes that's also the case. The big issue here, however, when we talk about all sorts of nasty things and kids using these whole guns, I looked up and researched how did all these guns ended up in the whole Arab world. Besides Russia giving them out, turns out that the glorious American government decided to just give a bunch to Mujahideens in the Afghan war because it was a Soviet gun.
Yep. And now Pakistan is the biggest open-air arms market in the world, and they're our allies.
That is kind of bizarre to me. But weirdly enough, just I guess I guess we're all sort of used to this, because if you live in these parts, then you always, when you play video games, especially ones where some shooters like Counter Strike. When I was
Tarkov.
Tarkov, well, my friends play Tarkov, but that requires way. I gave my account away there because that requires way too. I played it for a couple of weekends, but that requires way too much of actual focus, which I can't really do that.
Yeah, I can't play it when my girlfriend's around because I'll be screaming racial epithets and stuff. It really gets me going.
We're just used to seeing Kalashnikov everywhere, and then this is why, by the way, we sort of post-Soviet sphere. Everyone in Counter Strike liked to play terrorists because terrorists could buy the Kalashnikov, and we know that gun. We're just used to seeing that in our cultural sphere, but
Yeah, and then even the RPK, like the GPMG, is basically just a bigger Kalashnikov with a heavier barrel and a bigger magazine. So if you've trained on a Kalashnikov, you can train on an RPK. Use the bipod to deal with the recoil, but you're good.
the standard thing is with the whole cultural impact. I'm surprised because you sent me a picture of that. How widespread is to actually know something about Kalashnikovs and have them in the Western world?
Oh, pretty widely known. So for a while, before the latest Liberal government revised our firearms and took away handguns and AR-15s and a bunch of other fun stuff, you used to be able to get not an AK because it was banned by name. Basically, anything that was in an '80s movie was banned by name. Somehow we managed to hold on to the Beretta 92 for a while, but it's gone now too. But yeah. It's basically if it was in Rambo or some shit, the government would ban it because they've heard of it. But generally, our legislators don't know anything about firearms unless they come from like a rural area.
Wait,
Um,
no, it's fine because like Canadian gun control is interesting. As far as I know, at least last I checked, that was back in 2019, I guess. You could get your gun taken away from you very easily and quickly if you did something.
yes, yeah, we have red flag laws. So if anybody who doesn't like you makes a call into the RCMP, they'll take your guns. I think there will be legal challenges, but it's new law, so it's taken away a while to work its way through the courts.
Okay, now one other issue is like right now we're talking about the whole family of these firearms. What's the difference between like mostly the traditional one that most of the world knows as the 47 model and like a 74? What's the advancements out there? Because there's a bunch of technical data which I just couldn't really understand. So
Yeah.
what's the development future?
So you're talking about the change to the AKM?
AKM and then AK-74, because I just know that they exist and they look different.
Yeah, just a sec. Let me grab my book and I'll, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up for you. Oh, I should have mentioned in my acknowledgments that I'm very much indebted to Larry Canaher, who wrote AK-47, The Weapon That Changed the Face of War. I got it from my local library. It's a great book. Kalashnikov's main challengers were engineers from another design group known as TSNIIT Okhmash. Wow. Russian nomenclature is fucked.
That is the weirdest thing because they like their abbreviations. The funniest one, which got modified, by the way, and I think I mentioned that in a very old episode, but in their Navy, they used to be in the Soviet era something called Deputy of the Maritime Minister, something of that sort. And they kind of, they shortened it to Zamkom по морде, which is cool because it's заместитель комиссара по морским делам, or the Deputy of the Commissar in the maritime business. The problem is it also translates directly to getting hit in the face with a wrench. So abbreviations are long and horrible.
Yep, as a military person, I can agree. There's way too many abbreviations to keep track of. I just keep a notebook that's just abbreviations. So I'm pretty new, so I'm sure I'll get them, but until you start connecting them with things, it's hard to retain. Okay, so by the mid-1960s, they had developed a way to virtually eliminate recoil in the AKM, which used the intermediate round. The AL-7, as it was called, employed a counter-recoil system that almost perfectly matched the recoil from each round, with a spring balanced in the opposite direction, thereby eliminating any backwards motion. The two forces nearly canceled each other out, so they put in a compensator to counter recoil. And the other big change in 72 was it had always been wooden furniture previously, and the AKM was released with polymer furniture. So like plastics, I think Bakelite originally, and then they started to do new polymers as they became available.
I don't know. The classical wood stuff seems to be like just so used. Everyone just knows that stuff here. So
Yeah. Yeah, you keep it oiled and it's fine. But yeah, it's just a bit lighter if you've got plastic furniture, which makes it more comparable to the M16.
okay, but that's the whole weight thing.
Yeah, it's a heavy rifle. The one that I've got, I've got a Chinese Norinco Type 81, which is kind of a weird Franken gun because it's got a gas return system from the SKS in it, because it was developed after the Sino-Soviet split, so they couldn't get the gas return system, but they worked it out. It's a pretty good rifle.
Gas return, that's different from the piston operated. Okay, I know that the AK-47 is supposed to be piston operated.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the difference between gas return? Like, look, I'm not. I know my basic stuff, but what's the difference for fellow Europeans who probably are not into that stuff? What's the difference between piston operated and the whole?
So the gas return, the simple gas return from the Simonos, it's a bit of a simpler system. Like, as long as you keep your gas tubes cleaned out, it'll pretty much run forever. In the 90s, you used to be able to get an SKS in Canada for like $100 because they were clearing out the arsenals and they were just like everywhere. Like, the Canadian trio that pretty much every Canadian shooter gets is a 22 bolt action or semi-auto, a 12 gauge pump, and an SKS. Like, everybody's got that. They were talking about banning it, the Liberals were, and the firearms community was just like, good fucking luck. They're non-restricted, so you don't have to tell the RCMP if you've got one, and there's literally like tens of thousands of them across Canada. But yeah, the gas return system, it's simpler on the SKS than on the AK. The AK is a little more complicated, takes a little bit more in maintenance if you want to open it up and clean it, but actually you don't really have to, as long as you keep your barrel clean, which is easy because AK barrels are chromed. Which is one thing, like when people talk about the AK inaccurate, like I've got commercial hunting rifles that are worth $1,000 that don't have a chrome barrel. Like, you know what I mean? So it will remain as accurate as factory for as long as you keep it clean, basically.
That is approximately what I've heard from people, and that you can just have to, and you have to keep the barrel straight as well.
Yeah, you don't want to
technically.
You don't want to get a bend in it. The same with your furniture. If you get bend in the furniture, it can throw your aim off a little bit.
But okay, is that an effective range difference? Because again, heard when just
no, about 300 meters.
That's okay, I suppose.
Like accurately, you can shoot out to 500, but you're not necessarily going to hit what you're shooting at that point.
Theoretically, I was surprised when I read the whole book on instruction manual given out to modern day Russian soldiers in the Ukraine war. And it was on I think it still is on the Ministry of Defense of Russia's homepage, and they literally wrote down there that you shouldn't be that worried about accurately aiming, because that'll take some time. Just cover stuff up and don't worry about being a sharpshooter.
That's it. Try not to get hit, and when you see muzzle flashes, shoot at them, and you'll be fine.
Basically, try not to get punched or something. Try not to get into this, but don't hope on becoming a sniper thing. That doesn't work. Then they went on this whole triad there. Why it doesn't work? Because apparently modern warfare just is different, but still.
Yeah, I mean, Russia has excellent unit marksmen. You can rely on those guys to look after you. You just want, as an infantryman, to provide weight of fire. So if they're shooting at you, shoot back till you run out of ammo. Call out your support staff and get more ammo, and try and not die.
Trying not to die is pretty hard thing.
Especially that's the main role of an infanteer.
Hi everyone, Annette here. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who are supporting us on Patreon or via our website. Your financial support is really what keeps this show going, so thank you from the bottom of our heart. If you're not a Patreon and would like to become one, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/theeasternborder, or support us via our website, www.theeasternborder.lv. That said, hope you're enjoying this episode, and talk to you later. Bye!
But the weirdest part is like when I look at today's war, with how everything operates there, it's just that people just carry around these Kalashnikovs. And of course, there are some assaulting places, stuff you kind of have to have a gun, but they still run around with that stuff. And currently, everything's mostly about drones and tanks and everything. At the end of the day, you kind of have to have, I suppose, a guy with a gun out there. It's just that a lot of people who are just running around with these things.
Yeah, I remember when I read Romeo Dallaire's book about Rwanda. They were there officially as unarmed observers at the request of the Rwandan state, right? So they had personal defense weapons, like the officers had sidearms and the enlisted people had their, regular weapons, but they didn't have support weapons or the usual stuff you would have on a deployment where you might get shot at. And there was a Polish battalion that was part of the UN deployment there. And apparently there was an incident where some Belgian troops were massacred by the Rwandan Houthis, chopped up and left to be found, and it was pretty gruesome. And after that, all the Polish guys the next day all suddenly had AKs in their trucks. And nobody knew where they got them. But yeah, General Dallaire was like, I'm not saying shit, that's wise to take care. I've got my sidearm, you guys take care of yourselves. And that's generally been the Canadian approach to peacekeeping deployments is we'll be peaceful if you'll be peaceful, but if you shoot at us, we'll shoot at you, and we're awfully good at shooting. So think about it,
Awfully good at look, I don't know exactly how good you guys are.
We're friendly people, but in warfare we're pretty beastly. Those Celtic roots come out.
I've noticed because you have a bunch of people over here as well, about 2,000 or something. I haven't really got enough time right now to talk to these guys, but I know that your embassy listens to the show, so
oh, cool.
That's going to be neat. At some point, I'm just starting to wonder. We've seen all these drone things, and currently the latest exploits of Kalashnikov are tied into this. Is that the Russian side, they decided that flying FPV drones, which is what I do, and film things, that's difficult, and you have to train people with it so that they can actually fly into things and not just crash randomly.
Yeah.
You have to go in the simulator. It's way harder than flying in a DJI drone because it's basically a small helicopter. And then they decided to build out these tiny little threaded drone things on where they just slapped in. They basically slapped on some Kalashnikovs and with able to shoot them little threaded tiny things that cost about $2,000 or something more dollars, just rolling around.
Robot Wars Eastern Bloc Edition.
But this is going on. This is just really really going on because again.
Yeah, wait until they start strapping shape charges into them and running them into tanks.
No, but they're very, very slow. That's the problem there. And they can be easily taken out.
Yeah, a point defense weapon would have no problem.
Yeah, but the problem is also it's all about the communications and everything.
Yeah, also, think about the Chinese approach with all their fast torpedo boats. If you have enough of them coming, you can't shoot them all down.
About the whole warfare thing, switching over to Kalashnikovs and all these insurgencies and everything, it's been so many years since we have that rifle, and it's just a massive balance because of traditional Soviet/Russian thought of warfare is that everyone always knew over here that Americans and Western people NATO is going to have the best of everything. We're going to have something that's going to be a bit worse, but we're going to make loads of it. But it's been years upon years upon years. Why has Kalashnikov just stayed in the same position? Why do people still make rip-off Kalashnikovs? Not, I don't know, something more modern.
They keep modernizing it, right? They've got the AK-12 or whatever that they just modernized in 2012. It's every country has their own domestic firearms that they're proud of. In Canada, it's Colt Canada that makes the C series of rifles and machine guns, and basically our GPMG is just a modernized version of the German MG42. That's just how firearms work. You iterate and you develop, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you've got a system that works really well and that your soldiers are familiar with using, then why change?
I'm watching a channel especially for this. I also watched a channel called Task and Purpose on YouTube.
Oh yeah, I love that channel. Our American cousins.
Yeah, he's always making silly jokes about how everyone wants modularity and what was this modularity, and everything has to be super tactical. And then I saw the new grenades that you can stack upon each other, and I'm just wondering when they decide to throw huge amounts of them around. Oh, we also by the way, guys in Latvia also like a webcomic called Terminal Lance.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to check it out.
That's a webcomic from like a Lance Corporal about life in the army. But this whole operational stuff, if we're talking about all these Kalashnikovs and conscripts, well, this war previously it had been thought that you could just rely on professional soldiers because of how, they actually fire the enemy and they're more reliable. But this war in Ukraine has made me think that you can't just rely on that thing. That's why you have conscription, mobilization, all this stuff. Kalashnikov, I think, is therefore popular because it's easy to train people with and everything. But how do you see this war changing the whole attitude of NATO towards whole war stuff? Will we have our own analog of AKs? Because apparently it seems that we will actually sadly need some conscripts if we want to, fight a prolonged war anywhere. So are NATO's guns is ready? Do we have something in NATO basically that is as easy to train someone with as Kalashnikov, and is about as reliable, so that we could give to some, I don't know, random conscript that guards a stockpile of artillery shells out there somewhere? Do we have something similar?
Oh yeah, NATO stockpiles has everything. Like, not only do we have tons of Soviet era kit that we just found and have kept, but we've got all of quote unquote found. There's like modernized versions of the AK. There's like weird intermediate versions where they have like AR-15 furniture, but it shoots 7.62 by 39 round. There's all sorts. It just depends what your governments decide that you want. If you're interested in like what might be kind of coming out of this war in terms of NATO, I would look at what Sweden is doing, because they've just joined and they have a not inconsiderable military industry, and they have a historical relationship with the Baltic. So
they have submarines and they build their own fighter planes, which is like the Gripen ones. So they have
fantastic weapons. My favorite rifle is my Swedish Mauser, actually. Yeah, it's a bolt action, smooth as butter. It's from 1905, and it looks like it just came out of the factory. It's beautiful. They have really, really good quality steel there.
They make it there, so it's everything. They have their own doctrine of self-reliance and everything.
That's right. So if I were Latvia's defense minister, I would approach Sweden and say, what do you got for us?
I think we have done that already a lot. Because
your current service rifle is with Sweden, so it'd just be about modernizing what you've got, right?
That's our National Guard one. We have, I think we're using something that is like more modern with our main forces. But currently, military in the Baltics is just doing. We have a bunch of Canadians, Americans, and Norwegians, and all sorts of people over here. I know that we have
the tripwire forces.
We have bought some HIMARS missiles and everything, because and I know that our people in NATO are currently actively pushing for the whole idea that after we saw what's happening and the war in Ukraine, we kind of don't want the Russians to kind of overrun us.
Yeah, I think that's wise.
I suppose so. I highly doubt Russia has any available military to do anything. Now, Belarus is what I'm worried about.
Yeah, more proxy wars. That would be what I would expect too.
I guess, but again, this kind of reminds me, because again, when I was growing up with my grandma when I was a kid, there was always a saying that, grandma always used to teach me that she had lived through World War II, and I haven't seen war and real like plagues, and I should be happy about my life and finish my dinner.
Yeah.
Well, I did finish my dinner, but grandma, it's not as easy.
Yeah, the time caught up with all of us.
About the whole tripwire forces and everything. How likely is it that if some, like, currently the most realistic scenario, as I see it personally, is the fact that Belarus is just gonna maybe do some random drone attacks over the border, which they can claim that they didn't do, plausible deniability. They don't want to just do a massive assault anywhere there, but there's some low level testing things around. But everyone here is just, again, very worried about whether or not the West is actually going to come to our aid. And this is a Kalashnikov episode, but we're gonna pick up plenty if anything bad happens. But how do you feel about actually our odds of if something bad happens to NATO countries? Just, I had to ask you because you have more practical experience there. So.
Well, I mean, I'm a socialist and an internationalist, so like I care for you guys deeply and like want I would hope that NATO would meet our treaty obligations to you and come immediately. But obviously, domestic politics tend to take priority over international stuff in North America. So it would depend kind of on what's going on here. The tripwire forces there are your best bet, because there are people in Canada that don't know anything about Latvia, don't really know where it is. But if they hear that there are Canadian soldiers that are being attacked in a foreign country, that's going to change their minds really quick. And so I think for as long as those training missions are ongoing, you don't really need to worry.
Well, Canada has been pretty much it's mentioned pretty constantly by pro-Russian side, just because of your quite massive Ukrainian diaspora.
Yeah, and they say we're all gay.
That and that everyone who wants to do their Bandera thing, they should move to basically Canada or anything. But that always kind of stuns me a bit, because it's the same thing. If you look at the whole Kalashnikov thing, Russians are super proud of their Kalashnikovs a lot, even if they don't use them themselves. And with all the controversy and everything, that's one of the things that they take it as their own, and it has been impactful in the world history. Again, we have countries with flags on them, and kids use them and everything. Yet at the same time, the Soviet Union could build Kalashnikovs en masse. They could build tanks and everything. They couldn't feed the people because of their very weird ideas of basically colonialism from Moscow and everything. I think Russia really took away the wrong lessons from World War II, and Kalashnikov sort of is a part of that, which is why they're super happy about it and want to just stuff it all over the place, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that they learned some valuable lessons from World War II, particularly in how that they had worked with the partisans. And you can pretty much see a direct line between how the Soviet Union supported the partisans in occupied Europe and how they would go on to support anti-colonial movements during the post-war period.
All these movements in anti-colonization, you see, I grew up with like a Soviet era comedy newspapers, and on the last, they used to be like average satire about, lightly about the weird people in the kolkhoz and all the stuff. Of course, nothing political, but they're always on the last page of it, there was a massive dedicated page towards hating the West. It was just amazing. And I remember that when recalling this episode, there was one number which was about people being the very same issue with Americans giving AKs to the Afghani people, and the Soviet Union portrayed this for some reason, at least in these public things, that it's another glorious victory for Russia, because obviously this just proves that Kalashnikov is better than whatever Western forces are fighting.
Well, in the early days, they gave them old British 303s. They were pretty happy with those, but yeah. It's pretty much, when you're dealing with local forces, it's a pull system. So it's like what they use and what they want is what you try and give them. It's the same way with Kurdistan in like northern Syria. Like they use AKs, so we find AKs for them. It's not a problem.
Yeah, but right now, after this whole war, I'm starting to think that all the whole Soviet era equipment is gonna go completely, gonna be just used up basically, because it's not produced anymore. But everything's just,
yeah. Certainly, Russia's used its inheritance.
Yeah, absolutely. And another big issue. Well, we're definitely gonna see some whole standardization with other things. Maybe when it comes to drones, for example, it's kind of silly, because if I watch when I watch these drone videos from the front lines where someone is actually flying the kamikaze drones, they use the same firmware as I do when I'm flying my drone. It's just a simple consumer grade thing called Betaflight.
Ah, nice.
There's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
And it seems so silly that in Ukraine currently they have a huge issue with standardization, because again there are so many various models of everything sent there that people just work around stuff. I don't know. Where I'm leading with this is that there's the new war. Everything's being tested out. What do you think? Is there any chance of from what's happened in the war? Is there any weapon system that you've seen used in the war that could become the next Kalashnikov, the next culturally significant icon of the 21st century, just as Kalashnikov was on the 20th century?
I think probably the most relevant weapon systems to come out of this war have been anti-tank weapon systems. So like in Canada, we still use the old Swedish Carl Gustav, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that replaced with something new based on the experiences in Ukraine.
Just the big anti-tank. Are you talking about the man pads there or something?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think will be the big result of this. Not so much small arms. And small arms have been effective on both sides, so there's not that much to take away.
Small arms are at this point. Small arms are just something that you carry, or if you're Ramzan Kadyrov's troops, you post on TikTok about how you shoot them around randomly.
Yeah, it's not super relevant from like a defense minister's point of view. If they've got something that works, why mess with it?
Still, there are cases where basic training is necessary because back in Luhansk Donetsk forces, when the mobilization of the Russian army started, there were and they mobilized everyone in those separatist republics basically, and a lot of those, some people were given armored vests with the plate carriers inside, and we had a case which basically led to a bunch of people yelling about the incompetencies of all this thing, where one of the guys who was mobilized from those parts wanted to prove to his he got the rank 4 plate carrier thing, and he really wanted to prove that this is super tough and awesome. So he basically decided to shoot his AK bullet straight up and point blank range into his chest with the plate carrier thing.
Well, that's a Darwin Award.
That was a Darwin Award, yeah. But I have seen people do the weirdest things, because again, they really don't understand how these guns operate and what are the safety procedures and everything.
Yeah, and it's not rocket science. Like, really, if you had listened for the first 15 minutes of the safety briefing, you'd be okay.
In case of whatever, Kalashnikov is very you can pick it up and it's probably not going to hurt you that much.
Yeah, you're like, how do I load this? Maybe this big knob on the side. Yeah, there you go. Is the safety on? Nope. Okay. The child can use it. So
difficult part, by the way, is usually it's not just about the firearms.
Yeah,
it's the whole rest of the kit that the people have difficulties understanding how it's used.
Yeah, they're webbing.
Not just that, just infantry stuff as well. Everyone knows that you should put your helmet on.
Yeah,
but a lot of people just oftentimes make the mistake of laughing for lower grade armored vests, which are very useful because shrapnel exists and causes a lot of issue. This whole situation has made me understand a bunch of stuff about weaponry and weapon systems more than I actually would want to know.
Yeah, the artillery is what kills you.
Yeah, and artillery also these days.
Small arms is mostly for suppression.
Artillery kills you, especially if you still, like to form out your soldiers in a nice little tight line, which is sadly still happening.
Yeah, unless you've got some kind of skirmish order and are in cover, you're going to take real bad casualties if you're being shelled.
Cover is active. It's just that sometimes I don't understand the whole idea with just blasting random civilian stuff. I got this from the front lines out there from Zaporizhia, because apparently oftentimes when you hear about Russia blasting some random building out there with artillery, it's oftentimes they don't exactly aim anywhere. They're just, they have to fire X amount of shells per day and they need to fire them at some place. So they basically turn it in the general direction and, launch a few of them.
Yeah, unless you've got really accurate spotting, you're just kind of doing counter battery fire where you think the enemy might be.
Accurate spotting is...
This is kind of outside of my area of expertise, but...
The biggest issue that I've heard people complain about everything, and I wanted to ask someone from the West on this one. If you remember Moors, there was this guy called Moors who was a Girkin's associate, and he was told to shut up basically because he was complaining. He was the chief communications guy who did all the walkie-talkies and everything, and he complained about how these systems are just lacking in the Russian side. And he committed suicide after he was told to kind of do, and he did that as a sort of a way to draw attention to everything. Of course, nothing happened, but... Yeah,
he was trying his best to, get comm security so his men wouldn't get killed. I have a lot of sympathy for that.
But the problem with comm is the fact that they still oftentimes use WhatsApp and just civilian stuff on the front lines.
Yeah. If you're using open comms, you might as well be calling into the enemy command. It's fucking dumb.
I just really wonder about how this whole stuff is done, because again, with all the stuff that I've seen, with all the guns and people really still using all these AKs because they're good enough and sometimes rusty and everything. With all this stuff,
WD-40, little WD-40, like paper cloth, you can clean it right up.
But the big issue here is that, again, Now, this is from more a military perspective. If we see a side that's still using the AKs, who can't really train their soldiers and who have comms issues, a lot of people here still want to know why do people in the West, why do they oftentimes think that there's some sort of other rush ready to, attack, say, Germany or something? Oftentimes I see this whole idea of why does the West is just not giving enough weaponry when it needs to be given, and because oftentimes we hear the fact that Germany will give up such and such things to the front lines, where just because they want to prepare in case they need everything themselves.
The funniest thing was just Macron, when Macron personally got a bee in his bonnet and almost committed fucking NATO troops. Like, really?
Yeah, but no, NATO troops, as far as I get it, the idea is just to send the people to be like
volunteers.
No, not in the front lines, but instructors, freeing up people from the back line.
Yeah,
all
that
this
would be
stuff.
helpful.
That would be helpful, but I don't know how that would be. How that would be an escalation and everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If they took fire in any way, it'd be
Hey, but this could go very, very weird. One thing that I know is that, at least for now, I don't see any threats of nuclear fire. Still, no matter the more Putin yells about using nukes, the more I know it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think for all of my hatred and disrespect for Putin and what he represents, I do think that he's a more rational actor than that. That he knows that if he starts using nuclear weapons, it's going to mean he gets wiped off the map, and that's not his end game. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Ramzan Kadyrov and other weird people out there, oh boy, they would be just about kids doing all this stuff. Yeah, Ramzan Kadyrov basically, and everyone, they're teaching people how to disassemble Kalashnikovs and giving kids to play with them when they're in like second or third grades in Russia. They're dressing up in uniforms and everything.
Oh yeah, the Baathists do that in Syria too.
Yeah, because you can apparently get stuff done if you're in third grade with the thing. Although I think the arms might be a little tiny and it wouldn't be very, very comfortable.
For my part, I think kids' prefrontal cortex is still growing until they're about 25. So I don't think, if it were my child, I would encourage them not to enlist until they're at least that old, so that they can be making the adult decision for themselves. And I know that in wartime you need your 18 to 21 year olds, because they're the guys that are full of testosterone and are going to charge a machine gun nest and probably get killed. But in peacetime, there's no reason for those people to be in the military, I don't think, unless they're there to, get their education and get out.
About the whole military stuff, that was also the weirdest. That was one of the weirdest stuff that I've seen. That wasn't in Russia, but that was in Bosnia, because I went to Bosnia and Serbia, and over there with their own civil war, which, by the way, is going to restart soon. The day the United Nations peacekeepers leave that whole area, there's going to be another one, just because they still, there's insane amounts of tension. But over there, I saw a monument to all the warriors who were under the age of 18 while they were fighting and dying. And it's kind of like, wait, you have a monument to child soldiers?
Yeah. Not the best optics.
This whole widespread thing has but
at least they're acknowledging it rather than sweeping it under the rug, I guess.
I suppose, but then again, in a way, it wouldn't be possible to even arm all these people who wanted to do all these civil wars and most of Africa, in the Middle East, and in the whole post-Soviet sphere, if it wasn't for Kalashnikov and his cheap, effective gun that will just, you really have to fully destroy one to get it out of rotation, because someone somehow will steal it from the stockpile and sell it to someone for 50 euros or something.
Yeah, if you want to make an AK-47 not usable anymore, you pretty much have to take a piece of steel and weld it in the barrel. Otherwise, and even then, they could take the action, get a new barrel, and it's good to go. They're almost impossible to destroy.
But in a way, globally, I'm not sure if that's such a good thing. Because
it's not. It's absolutely not. One of the reasons why I got into engineering is to learn how to put weapons out of commission, so that when we're in war zones and places where peace is broken out, that we can decommission and make sure those weapons never kill anyone again. I'm a soldier. If it's wartime, we can use weapons, but if it's peacetime, they have no business being on the streets, and we got to get them up as fast as we can.
That, by the way, was one of my biggest kind of shifts from my silly silly teenage years and everything, and to now when I'm an adult, because I was playing video games as a kid, and some of them had realistic guns, and I remember my favorite one was the very futuristic Heckler and Koch, the one with the caseless ammo and everything.
Oh yeah, G11.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool thing.
It's a neat idea, yeah.
And then when I was then for a while I was still young and stupid. Now I'm just stupid. I always wondered, well, why didn't they just adopt it? Because caseless ammo sounds really cool and it's all futuristic and everything. Then I kind of realized that in real situations you want something that is cheap and usable by everyone. It's the people's gun that costs less and is reliable is much better than super expensive thing that will break down in real combat situations.
Yeah, as a Marxist, all warfare is reproductive struggle. So you want to be able to reproduce elements of your, if you can produce more rifle sections, more rifle platoons, more rifle companies than the enemy can in a long enough timeline, you're likely to win. You know what I mean? So that's the genius of the AK in a word.
The closest thing you can compare it, I think, in the whole influence thing is that it's kind of like a spear. Spears used to be popular, then the AK arrived, basically. Spears, then muskets.
Yeah, pretty much.
We use spears in all sorts of ways, and I don't even know. I don't even know it's more popular these days.
Yeah, they kind of persist even with the bayonet, right?
Yeah, no, everyone, by the way, which is a thing that I've recently found out, everyone hates the bayonets. No one likes to do the stab thing at all.
Yeah, it runs contrary to basically your instinct as a human being to bayonet someone. You have to really train people to, and generally they don't. I think the last time there was a bayonet charge in history was the French in Yugoslavia. I think they did a little bayonet charge when they ran out of ammo.
There have been melee fighting though between India and China due to their weird border situation, but
Canada has the last cavalry charge. It was in World War I.
Okay, you.
They charged with swords. It was wild.
Very, very Canadian. I hope that I hope they did it over ice.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool, like the Great Northern War.
No, like charging on ice has been like a very, very scary thing. Talking about Canada and everything, I better hope that you guys have a plan also, because after all, you do share quite a lot of. You're not that far from Russia, especially when it comes to the far northern territories and everything.
Yeah. Do you know about the Canadian Rangers?
The Mounties?
No, the Rangers.
No idea. Please do explain. You get to talk about all the Canadian military stuff that I never knew about.
Oh, goody. Okay, so in the far north, there's a branch of the Canadian Forces called the Canadian Rangers. And basically what it is if you are a member of an Aboriginal community or like a Northern miner, you can join the Rangers. And what the Rangers do is they'll give you a basic military training, they'll give you a snowmobile, and they'll give you a bolt-action rifle. And a lot of people in the north like snowmobiles and bolt-action rifles. So pretty much everybody who's military age joins the Rangers for a while so that they can get their snow machine and bolt-action rifle, right? Used to be Lee Enfields. We were made fun of for keeping the Lee Enfield in service for so long, but they've recently reissued them with like really nice Tikka bolt-action rifles that I would love to have one of someday. But they're like $1,200, so it's a little outside of my price range. But yeah, that's the Canadian Rangers. And the Canadian Forces go up every year and do a joint exercise with them. And yeah, we're specialists in northern climes. And yeah, you don't need to worry. If the Russians decide to come over the polar ice caps, we'll be ready. We'll sick the polar bears on them.
Sadly, Latvian expertise is basically being sappers, because we still have ridiculous amounts of unexploded ammunition here.
Yeah, no, sappers are hella useful.
As far as I know, we're pretty good, but I was told that by a Norwegian guy who spoke with a bunch of people in Latvian army camp. So,
well, the engineers are responsible for the whole built environment of the battlefield, right? So if you're wanting to build a defense in depth against something like a Russian tank-based offensive, your engineers are the people that are going to give you the upper hand, that are going to be the force amplifiers, that are going to build your forward operating bases, that are going to build tank traps, that are going to build positions for your tanks to go haul down so you can surprise the enemy. Yeah, so if you're producing excellent engineers and you're being trained by Canadian engineers who are some of the best in the world, look the fuck out, Russia, if you're coming.
I don't think Russia is coming. It's just that, which is why I'm writing my article for Foreign Policy magazine about. which is why it's taking so long. Is I got asked the question of what does the average Russian want from this war? If Russia wins, what does he expect?
Yeah.
And that's the longest article ever written about apathy and the reasons for it and how it's been created. So
Oh yeah, I'll be really interested to read that when it comes out.
I'm gonna finish my draft after we finish recording because I called up everyone, and there's only some. I have to word everything very carefully because it's mostly about nothing. Because no one really wants anything, and that's a whole can of worms.
That's all right. Seinfeld did pretty well off of a show about nothing.
I have seen like a single episode of that because I needed to get that on my check mark. Because Seinfeld, we didn't get Seinfeld here in the whole post-Soviet sphere. We got all sorts of things. I have to.
We do not want American Jew here.
No. We got a little something because Latvia and Estonia owes a bunch of stuff to Richard Dean Anderson, though.
Oh yeah, Richard Dean Anderson's the man.
No, the thing is, as back in the 90s, and I'll wrap this up with this one, and then I'll let you the final word. In the 90s, when you spoke about VD40, you can remember this. In the 90s, we gave random words. We named things which we didn't have in the Soviet era by the things where we saw them being used. So now the official term for the silvery duct tape is the MacGyver in Latvia and Estonia.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that goes in the engineers too. We MacGyver things all the time.
But yeah, if you have something you want to add to this, please do.
No, just thanks very much for having me on. This has been my first experience.
Oh, nice. Just I'm sorry for misunderstanding a bunch of technical stuff, but I hope that it was interesting for people. At least now we have this episode about Mr. Kalashnikov and everything, and just hopefully there will be a time when kids don't need to use guns. En masse and all over the place. We should probably get rid of those.
Yeah, if your ideology requires that children have to die, you probably need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Richard, and to all of you out there, please consider supporting our show. I remind you, we have T-shirts now. The link is on the Eastern Border.lv site. It's pretty long. I have to figure out how to, shorten it maybe. But we have T-shirts now. You can become.
I can't wait to get my map of the GTA. The Toronto map.
The Toronto map. Yes, I'll finish the article because the Toronto map is a bit problematic here.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna look at the area thing because I can get you the replica. We have Soviet maps. We have all sorts of things. I'll deal with all this issue. My life has been a bit of a messy stuff around lately because a lot of things have happened. But still, you can also always just reach out and find me. But as usual, до свидания, товарищи. And remember, happiness
is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.